President Barack Obama offered a heartfelt and impassioned farewell during an address to the nation last night. The president chose his hometown of Chicago to say his goodbyes and reflect on his 8-year run as president of the United States. Standing before more than 18,000 supporters at the McCormick Place in Chicago, he touched on his accomplishments, discussing race and also preserving our democracy. Here is some of what the president had to say in his 50-minute speech.
Tonight, it's my turn to say thanks. Whether we have seen eye to eye or rarely agreed at all, my conversations with you, the American people, in living rooms and in schools, at farms, on factory floors, at diners, and on distant military outposts, those conversations are what have kept me honest and kept me inspired and kept me going. And every day I have learned from you. You made me a better president, and you made me a better man. Yes, our progress has been uneven. The work of democracy has always been hard. It's always been contentious. Sometimes it's been bloody. For every 2 steps forward, it often feels we take 1 step back. But the long sweep of America has been defined by forward motion, a constant widening of our founding creed to embrace all, and not just some. If I had told you 8 years ago that America would reverse a Great Recession, reboot our auto industry, and unleash the longest stretch of job creation in our history, if I had told you that we would open up a new chapter with the Cuban people, shut down Iran's nuclear weapons program without firing a shot, take out the mastermind of 9/11. If I had told you that we would win marriage equality and secure the right to health insurance for another 20 million of our fellow citizens, if I had told you all that, you might have said our sights were set a little too high. But that's what we did. That's what you did. You were the change. You answered people's hopes, and because of you, by almost every measure, America is a better, stronger place than it was when we started. Race remains a potent and often divisive force in our society. Now, I've lived long enough to know that race relations are better than they were 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, no matter what some folks say. You can see it not just in statistics, you see it in the attitudes of young Americans across the political spectrum. But we're not where we need to be. And all of us have more work to do. So if we're going to be serious about race going forward, we need to uphold laws against discrimination in hiring and in housing and in education and in the criminal justice system. That is what our Constitution and our highest ideals require. But laws alone won't be enough. Hearts must change. My fellow Americans, it has been the honor of my life to serve you. I won't stop. In fact, I will be right there with you as a citizen for all my remaining days. But for now, whether you are young or whether you're young at heart, I do have one final ask of you as your president. The same thing I asked when you took a chance on me 8 years ago. I am asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours. I am asking you to hold fast to that faith written into our founding documents, that idea whispered by slaves and abolitionists, that spirit sung by immigrants and homesteaders and those who marched for justice, that creed reaffirmed by those who planted flags from foreign battlefields to the surface of the moon. A creed at the core of every American whose story is not yet written. Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. May God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
All right, folks, let's talk about this with our panel. A. Scott Bolgen, attorney and former chair of D.C. Democratic Party. Liz Copeland, founding president, the Urban Conservative Project. And Dr. Greg Carr, chair, Department of Afro-American Studies, Howard University. It was interesting for the president, obviously, to go back to Chicago, as he said, getting his political start there. But for the purpose of our audience, I mean, do understand, there was a progression of black politics that set up last night.
Yep.
And so, I mean, Harold Washington, 1983.
That's right, brother.
The success of Congressman Harold Washington being elected mayor led to the chance of Run Jesse Run.
That's right.
Which sets up Reverend Jackson running in 1984. Right. Reverend Jackson then running again in 1988, changing the rules, the Democratic rules of proportional delegation. It was winner take all. It was Dr. Ron Walters, Ron Brown, Harold Ickes, changes those rules. That's what put President Barack Obama in position to even win the nomination. That's right. Because had it been winner take all, Hillary Clinton would have won the Democratic nomination. And so it was granted, none of those themes came up last night. But
or any of those individuals were referenced in the speech.
Right, but I think it's important for our audience to understand, if those things, if those dominoes don't fall, you don't have the first black president.
That's right.
Yeah,
you wouldn't have had him. I mean, David Axelrod worked on the Harold Washington campaign. I mean, you know, and interestingly enough, he could have shouted out that tradition. Barack Obama's careful evasion of the platform, the rocket that propelled him, has been one of the most puzzling things of his presidency. I mean, it doesn't do you any good, brother. Right, Jesse, I mean, the gift of Ron Brown puts Bill Clinton in the White House. And never forget, were it not for the arguably stolen election in 2000 and 2004, there would be no Barack Obama, because John Kerry would have been the president. But again, we're talking about a person who was a direct beneficiary of black politics. And Chicago, of all places, he could at least put a sentence.
And the reason I'm bringing that, because here's the deal, and I know somebody's watching, they're probably already tweeting, oh man, you hating on the speech. No. In my commentary last night, Liz and Scott, what I said to our folks watching is, yes, I understand people are being emotional. I understand those tears. But do understand, our history has been, we are not satisfied with the first. You be focused on the next, and not just somehow believe this moment will never happen again.
I think that's very important. And as the only conservative on this panel, I want to be clear to our viewers that in 2008, Barack Obama, he got black votes. He got 95% of black vote. That included urban conservatives such as myself. I know plenty black Republicans who saw him as qualified, and white rural conservatives as well. Class. But when we look at the historic nature of his candidacy, we saw that. Republicans saw that as well. Now, we like him. We like the guy. We might not agree with his policies, but we were bought, and we bought into his idea of a better America, and we did want a post-racial America. And when he talked about those issues in his speech, I mean, it was a great speech. I do think he was speaking to his party. I don't think he was speaking to all of America. There were some points as a black American, as a black Republican, that rang true, and he was spot on. He called out my party's flaws and his party's flaws. But I think that for the most of the speech, he was really talking to Democrats.
He could be speaking to all of them, actually. And the great irony of Barack Obama or any presidential leadership is they have successes and failures. I thought it was interesting that he went back to Chicago to have this discussion with his supporters, and yet one of the largest criticisms is that he hadn't done enough for Chicago. The killing fields of Chicago, the gang killings, and the high crime rate devoting federal resources to making that change in his home state. I think he gets criticized for that in Chicago as well as nationally. But listen, every presidential leadership piece cannot be defined by just one success or one failure. It'll be a mixed bag, and I think we'll discuss that for centuries to come.
Also, it was so I want to play this bite here, and I want to talk about with our panel where he actually confronted in a real way the issue of race.
You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. For blacks and other minority groups, that means tying our own very real struggles for justice to the challenges that a lot of people in this country face. Not only the refugee or the immigrant or the rural poor or the transgender American, but also the middle-aged white guy who, from the outside, may seem like he's got advantages, but has seen his world upended by economic and cultural and technological change. We have to pay attention and listen. For white Americans, it means acknowledging that the effects of slavery and Jim Crow didn't suddenly vanish in the 60s. That when minority groups voice discontent, they're not just engaging in reverse racism or practicing political correctness. When they wage peaceful protest, they're not demanding special treatment, but the equal treatment that our founders promised.
The reason that's important, last night, Dana Bash of CNN, she tweeted, she said, she was talking about this particular speech, and I know Dana very well, worked with her over there, but when I saw it, I had to correct her. And this is what she said. Right here. Dems have an internal struggle on whether to focus on economics or racial equality. POTUS is weaving it all together for you. I responded, no, Dana, they are together. You can't separate the issue of racial equality from economics because economics is at the heart of racial inequality.
And it transcends race. I mean, the same people that voted for Donald Trump, the white working class, are the same people who saw hope in Barack Obama. That's an incredible statement.
Some of them.
But you still had, they were still looking for hope. His message last night was, we cannot forget about that working class because in large part, that produced Donald Trump. And I think the Dems are not only struggling with the economic message, I don't think it's so much a race message as you said, but what they're struggling with is, how did we leave white working class voters behind? How do we get them back? And what is our message to
Greg,
them?
It was critical for him to say, hey, that little post-racial nonsense, that's exactly what it was. I don't know what y'all were thinking, but that was nonsense.
Right, but you know, and it's interesting, I mean, you even talk about being post-racial, but even the way Obama did it, his carefully calibrated attempt to talk to everybody at once, that's not how you bridge these gaps. We've seen Reverend Barber with the fusion politics, as we talked about many times on this show, but also in your commentary last night, and again today before we went on camera, you mentioned Jesse Jackson in '84 and '88. I mean, we need to hear more about that, because Jackson's Rainbow Coalition spoke to the Appalachian whites.
Exactly. Actually, the Rainbow Coalition, again, set up
that is exactly
2008.
But from a different position. It wasn't appealing to try to, no. It was addressing these very deep economic issues without getting away from the question that we do have differences, legitimate differences.
Liz, 30 seconds before I go to break, again, last night was important because you did have to weave it all together and to get people to understand, which I think was also critically important, challenging folks saying, you got to be in the game.
Right,
You can't just right now be sad, crying and everything. No, you got to stay in this fight.
Yeah, that was a good call to action for everyone, and he was speaking to me. I was like, wow, I really need to get out there in this blue city in Baltimore and register some more Republicans. But I think I want to talk about the racism also.
That's finding a unicorn, but go ahead.
I guess I am the unicorn in Baltimore.
Right.
So it's important. It's important for Republicans to acknowledge the existence of racism, and it's also important for Democrats to not make every issue racist when we talk about the interaction, the interaction between people.
But see, to me, that's the difference. It's a different discussion than saying something is racist as opposed to saying something is racial. But we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that another day.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.